Hey everyone, Tactics here with another Dragonflight tank video, this time diving into Blood Death Knights. I'll be looking at what's changed for Blood DKs going from Shadowlands into Dragonflight, including their new tier set, the major talent revamp coming in the expansion, as well as a couple potential builds that'll work for both Raid and Mythic Plus content. I've already done similar videos for both Protection Warrior and Guardian Druids, which I'll link down below in the description if you want to check those out. And I'll be putting out more videos for all the remaining tanks over the next few days, so make sure you guys subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you know when those get posted. Otherwise, let's start off by talking about some of the playstyle differences for Blood moving into next expansion. The biggest one by far is the no more kind of extending your dancing rune weapon thing. And well, that was kind of an extremely powerful playstyle. It really wasn't the healthiest thing for both the spec and kind of the game as a whole. And honestly, Blood DK feels way better to play with that gone, since you're no longer using every possible rune available at all times just to kind of spam hard strike to extend your weapon. Instead, what you're getting a lot more focus on is Death and Decay, specifically being inside your Death and Decay at all times, though it is pretty easy to get that 100% uptime that you're aiming for, thanks to the ability to get multiple charges, as well as those procs you can get. And I'll explain that in the talent section a bit more as to why that is a thing. Luckily, things that you are keeping moving into this expansion is that CDR on your Dancing Rune weapon, so while you're not able to extend it forever, you are able to get it back fairly quickly, or at least much quicker than you could before wearing that legendary. So you'll always be able to kind of move into pulls in Mythic Plus, for example, with that up to help get through that initial setup period on pulls, which is something that notoriously Blood DKs have kind of struggled with. So you'll still have that tool for you, which is very important, and it's really nice to have specifically in Mythic Plus content. And when that's paired with some of the other defensive options Blood DKs have in the new talent tree, it makes them probably the most durable tank out of all six moving into Dragonflight, even tankier than the Protection Warrior, which we already covered. Probably the biggest downside of DKs right now is their damage. Moving into this expansion, you're of course losing Gavel, and you're losing those strength stacks from your tier bonus, so they're losing quite a bit in the damage front, though at this point in the development cycle, being slightly undertuned numbers wise in a single area is honestly a pretty solid spot to be in. It's not even like DK's damage is atrociously bad or behind or anything like that. They're just slightly behind some of the other tank specs in both AoE and single target. This is probably more prevalent in AoE just because their damage is also slightly more sustained as opposed to bursty, so you can run into some threat issues if DPS aren't careful, if you're lacking a misdirect, that kind of thing, which is definitely a bigger problem for them in Dragonflight than something like single target, which can actually be kind of fixed with a different capstone talent selection, which again I'll go through in the talent section. Overall, I think DK is actually looking really solid going to Dragonflight, and with some slight numbers tuning on the damage end, they could end up being one of the strongest tanks in the game in both Raids and Mythic Plus. From there, let's talk a little bit about their tier. So first off, their 2-piece, when a Bone Shield charge is consumed, you have a 20% chance to generate 1 rune, and their 4-piece, after 10 Bone Shield charges are consumed, you gain 10% damage and haste for 10 seconds. So overall, runes are always nice to have, especially with the new talent tree. Again, I'll go through that in a second here, but you get a lot more runic power generation from this new talent tree, and so being able to have more runes as well is nice. The only downside is the reliability of said tier set, right? The randomness is not something you really want when you're looking at tank tier sets. For DPSers, having that like something like a 20% chance, for example, you have it consistently enough that you're able to play around it and with it. Tanks like to be a lot more reliable, and so I'm not a big fan of it being just a chance to generate a rune, but I don't think it's a massive impact to Blood DK being that randomness, because you do have so many runes to play with in general. It's just something I'm not the biggest fan of, but it's still decently powerful to have. That 4-piece bonus giving you 10% damage and haste for 10 seconds. Also, not too bad. You have a pretty decent uptime on it right now. Not quite 50%, slightly less than 50% at the moment. The one thing to note for both of these effects is that they currently don't interact with Tombstone, which I assume is a bug, so hopefully it does get fixed, but that is something to note at least for now. So you can't use Tombstone to get, 5, I assume it would be 5 chances at a 20% hit of a rune, or to get 5 additional stacks of this 4-piece towards your damage and haste proc. So something to note. This could get a little bit better if Tombstone gains interaction with it, which again I hope it does, and I think it should, but something to keep in mind. In general, this tier set is fine. It's nothing super impactful, but again, Blizzard is really not aiming for super interesting, insanely game-changing tier bonuses in this first raid of the expansion with the massive talent revamp coming. So while this is a little bit boring, it's pretty fine power-wise, especially compared to the other tank one. So nothing really to complain about there aside from the bugs and the slight randomness of this for a tank spec. All right, and that brings us to talents. So let's look a little bit at these talents here. I'll walk you through kind of choices, starting with the general class tree here for DK. So starting off, you do have that Death Strike, and moving down here, let's just talk about like everything you really do want to have off the top here. So AMS, of course, you really want to have that. Improved Death Strike, that 5 RP reduction and 10% increased healing, which is the healing is nice, but the RP reduction is really, really big for DKs here. And you're moving down. This is just 10% stamina per point, so you get a total of 20% stamina for 2 points. Kind of nuts. And there you're going to get moved down again, probably on this side here because IBF is over here. So you're going to grab your kick. And this is where you have 3 completely viable choices in what you take depending on the content. You have the kick giving you runic power and making a 3-second reduction. So it's a 12-second kick now DKs have access to, which can be very, very powerful. If you need the couple kicks, maybe there's a certain ability in a dungeon which is able to be kicked by a 12-second kick that has existed. For example, the biggest thing was that I can remember off the top of my head is the Goliaths in Spires of Ascension, last expansion. Shamans who have the only 12-second kicker before this could get every single kick. So this is something that can be very, very powerful in certain dungeons, in certain situations, or even certain boss fights in raid if there's a kick on them as well. So keep that in mind. You also have access now to Blinding Sleet, which is an AoE stop for DKs, not attached to Mass Grip. 1 minute CD, so kind of middling when it comes to AoE stops, better than something like Intimidating Shout that Warriors have, worse than In-Cap Roar that Guardian Druids have. Overall, pretty decent utility option. Having an access to take an AoE stop if you want it, always nice. Your default option is probably going to be Permafrost, which is just you get some extra absorb shields from auto attacking things, and Blood DKs do auto attack fairly hard. So you'll probably default to this, but all 3 of these are viable choices. So this is a really, really great row. You can take any of these, and you may have a spare point later on to take a second one if you really want to, but we'll see as we move down the tree. From there, let's go get our Icebound. And this opens up the next row for us here. I kind of want to decide, okay, so where do we want to go from here? Taking this 60-second CDR on Icebound, honestly, in the vast majority of cases, I don't think is necessary. It's a nice little extra thing you can have, but really, you have so many tools and you are so durable as a Blood DK through some of the other talents you're taking already. So it's not really needed. It's just kind of an extra you can take later on. So we're going to actually move down here. We're going to take our crit. And moving down, you have a couple options, and it's going to vary depending on, again, raid, mythic plus, that kind of thing, right? Asphyxiate rather, is right there. Your 5-second stun, so you can take that if you're in content like dungeons, where you can stun things a lot. Otherwise, though, you're going to move straight down this way because you really, really want to move down this left side of the tree. So your choices here are cleaving, icy chains of ice, or 15% stronger absorb. So that's pretty good. It interacts here with Permafrost, interacts with your mastery or with your blood shields. So pretty not bad. Moving down here, so auto attacks have a chance to generate runic power. So as I mentioned, your runic power generation is going to be a whole lot better in this moving into this expansion, especially compared to the beginning of expansions, right? So this is part of that, but now we still need 9 points to kind of unlock this, and this is where you kind of start branching out to a different part of the tree, right? So you have a couple like 1-point options over here, right? Like you have AMZ, something you probably aren't always going to take, right? Like there's definitely like in dungeons, for example, like there's situations where you don't take AMZ. Even some raid bosses, probably less likely in raids. You probably always kind of want this in raids. So let's assume we're doing a raid centric build here where we're going to grab AMZ. Maybe we don't necessarily need the bigger AMZ. This is a 10% increase to the absorb on AMZ. As a blood DK, you do already have that default bigger AMZ here, so you don't necessarily need this. So let's just say we're getting AMZ. I still need 8 points, so let's move down the side here of this tree, and you're gonna get some good things. So Raised Dead is free damage. Cleaving Strike in your D&D, you kind of have to just take that. Then you have the choice of either Sacrificial Pact on the side here or Enfeeble. Control Undead hasn't really had any uses so far in the expansion. Situationally, if it's ever good in a specific dungeon, for example, you could take it. I tend to prefer taking Enfeeble here, but Sacrificial Pact is perfectly fine as well. Just be careful not to kind of desync it from your Raised Dead too much. You always want to make sure you're using it in your Raised Dead, and if timing is not right, you can kind of like scuff one, so be careful. Moving down here, Brittle, your Gs have a chance to weaken your enemy, causing your attacks against them to deal 6% increased damage. Nice extra damage. Passive 2% strength here, and then you also are still 3 points away from unlocking the bottom, and we can get down there. So what you're going to take, you've got Lichborn becoming a DR again, that conduit that we currently have access to, plus it has a 2-second duration increase, so that's always nice as a little buffer thing, because that is the one thing with DKs, right? Often you don't really care too much about having the bigger DRs, and so like if you're just directly comparing these two, right, this one gives you an extra 2-minute CD, whereas this one, it just reduces this from a 3-minute to a 2-minute. So honestly, this is like a way more valuable point than this, in my opinion, because it gives you another button. And then we have one of our first big D&D buffs here. You get 5% haste at all times in Death and Decay. Obviously, this one is also a Death and Decay buff in AoE, but Raid, we're assuming it's a lower target scenario, so we're moving down here. So you do now have 1 point available to you that you can kind of spend as you wish. Again, this is going to be a Raid scenario, so we're assuming we don't really need things like Asphyxiate. We probably don't need this Kick or this Blinding Sleet upgrade here. So you have really only a couple options. Sacrificial Pact for a little damage, the 60-second CDR on Icebound, there's some Leech, not really needing the Leech as a blood DK. There's a little speed boost to Death's Advance. Again, not too important. It is easier to access than Wraithwalk is. As you see, we don't actually have Wraithwalk accessible to us right now, and we're not going to in a raid build. So if you needed the extra mobility, and seeing as we can't really access Wraithwalk, that's something you could do. Big anti-magic barrier buff here as well, 20 seconds on the CD and a bigger absorption effect. That's probably what you're going to be defaulting to, especially if you can actually get use out of AMS consistently. You may not always be able to do that. And there's also actually the extra death grip range down here as well. So all things you can consider depending on the fight. But again, I'm going to default by saying anti-magic barrier, multiple options here. Then, as I mentioned, now we're going to go down the left side of this capstone area. So here is the kind of DK raid buff thing, auto attack, reducing the target's attack speed by 5%. Obviously, weakness or whatever that curse is does exist now. It wasn't in the beta for a while. It is in there now. So Warlocks have this. Rogues have this as a choice node as well. So I'm not actually 100% sure if these all stack, but there it is. It is kind of like a pseudo raid buff for DKs. And then you have Icy Talon, so your runic power spending abilities, Death Strike, increases your melee attack speed by 3% for 6 seconds, so you get a total of 9%, assuming you are Death Striking every 6 seconds, which again, combined with Runic Attenuation, gives you a fair bit of extra runic power to play with. Then going to get Empower Rune Weapon, you get 15% haste, 1 rune, and 5 runic power instantly, and then every 5 seconds for 20 seconds, 2-minute CD. Just pretty nice for general resource generation increase. You're also going to get Will of the Necropolis, of course, pretty big DR putting in work there, and you're going to want to go down to A-Bomb Limb as well. So you get Consuming a Rune, has a chance to increase your strength by 6% for 8 seconds, just a little passive buff, and then A-Bomb Limb, of course. And this leaves you with another 2 points to play with. And this is again kind of where you have, okay, what am I doing? We're in raids in the situation, so we're not going to be able to access Soul Reaper. So if we just wanted pure damage and we didn't need anything else, you can go 2 points in Unholy Bond to increase the effectiveness of Runeforge stuff. If we don't really care about that, what we can do here, this gives you another charge of Death Advance, so it has mobility, gives you another charge of Death and Decay, so it helps with your Death and Decay uptime, and it gives you another charge of Death Grip in case you are gripping adds for whatever reason. So this is actually a pretty value single point. It's not going to be good on every raid fight. Like, I'm sure there's raid fights where this is probably not great in terms of the utility of it, the death advance and the death grip, but it's always going to basically ensure you have 100% uptime on that death and decay for not only this 5% haste, but also some stuff in the blood DK specific tree. So it is a pretty very solid single point to invest in, and since we have two, I think the default is always going to be investing that single point here. Then we have one more point. Again, the only real things you have here is when you fall below 30%. This is not too great, honestly. Very passable. We can't really reach Wraith Walk alone, unfortunately, so it's 1 point on Holy Bond. Or again, going back to those talents that I mentioned previously, if you need more mobility than 2 charges of Death Advance, right, you just need to be a little bit faster in those Death Advance, you can grab March. If you need kick at a certain timer or AoE stop, which is unlikely for raids, you can grab those. You can get your 60 seconds now on Icebound. You can get a stun if you need it. You can get a slightly buffed AMZ if you need it. You can get Death Grip range if you need it. So it's really up to you where you put this last point. I'm just going to slap it here just because, but you have a couple pretty flexible points in the DK tree, which is really nice because you have a lot of different options. Now, if we're talking about something more Mythic Plus oriented, I'm going to move this around a little bit. I'm going to say you're going to take Blinding Sleet instead of Permafrost here, just because I think Blinding Sleet is more likely to be valuable. But again, all 3 of these are good. I'm a big fan of AoE stops. They're very strong in Mythic Plus, so I think it's likely you'll take that. You probably won't be taking AMZ, you'll be taking Asphyxiate. And now you've got this 1 extra point. You definitely, though you have access to Wraithwalk now, you almost 100% will not take this in a dungeon scenario. You really don't need Wraithwalk, especially if you are taking Death's Echo over here for 2 charges of Death's Advance. It's not something that's super valuable in dungeon content, in my opinion. So you're back to having similar options, though now Grip of the Dead is on this choice note as well, which is a lot more powerful in dungeons as well. I'll put a point in that for the sake of putting a point in that. But again, you have a lot of similar options. You have the option to take AMZ, right? Like, in not every dungeon you will take AMZ, but if you have a dungeon that's very high magic damage, maybe you want AMZ for a lot of the bosses or even some of the trash, that point is 100% takeable. Maybe you have a dungeon that now Control Dead is good in, 100% takeable. You can also just drop Enfeeble to take Control Undead as well. Maybe you're just like, hey, I just want to have that 12-second kick. You can take that as well. You could even drop Blinding Sleet to take that as well, right? So you do have, again, options to play with in the Blood DK tree. I'm gonna slap this in Grip of the Dead, but again, you could go anywhere with this Mythic Plus stuff. It's just the stuff you more likely want to tank are that AoE stop there and Asphyxiate to make sure you have. You can also drop this point here also in Anti-Magic Barrier if you're not going to get as much use out of it. So again, options, really nice to have. All right, then let's look at the blood specific tree. So moving down, you're going to take all these beginning points because you kind of have to kind of open up your tree. So this is just your default stuff, right? Heart Strike, Mirror, and Blood Boil, Vamp Blood, your Crimson Scourge, Death and Decay procs. And then we're moving down the tree. We kind of want to see, so what do we really need to grab down here? So we need to get to Dancing Rune Weapon and the center area here. How do we do that? It's kind of improve Vamp Blood or improve Heart Strike. This is a little bit more defensive. This is obviously damage. You don't really need this, trust me. So we go for the damage here, so we now can have access to Dancing Rune Weapon. And we have 1 more point to spend between these two, Ossuary and Death Caress. Ossuary is definitely the must pick. You're going to see we have to take both anyways, but let's put the point in Ossuary for now to open up this next area and kind of see where we want to go from there. So Dancing Rune Weapon for sure we need. Here's Insatiable Blade, which is the generating 5 Bone Shield charges, and when you consume Bone Shield, it reduces the cooldown. So that's your CDR on Dancing Rune Weapon. And here we have kind of like the pseudo of our current tier in the last tier of Shadowlands. So you get an additional copy of Dancing Rune Weapon and a flat 8-second duration increase. You cannot extend it more. It's just a flat duration increase. So this is still really nice to have. It's still very helpful in all situations. It's just you don't get that infinite extension style, which again, I am a fan of the playstyle being not that. So I am a fan of this. Moving down though, what do we really want to access here? Now, the thing is, we kind of want to access both the left and the right side of these bottom trees, I think, for both rating and Mythic Plus. So you need to work your way down these trees on both sides. So how do we really do that? So we want to look, what are some of the kind of mandatory traits we really want to grab on this side? And it's really just improved bone shield. That's like your big, I want that trait. If you move to the right side, what you kind of want on the way down is Coag, which lets enemies affected by your blood take 5% increased damage, and Death Strike increases the damage of your blood plague, which stacks a bunch of time. And again, that's an 8-second buff, and you already have a 6-second buff that you're hoping to keep up with Death Strike here, so that's going to passively kind of keep itself up anyway, so you really want to make sure you access that. And then Rapid Decomp just further amps your blood plague. So as you can see, blood plague damage is decently boosted here a fair bit. So you really want to grab these two as well. So how do we do that? Let's start on the right side. Need to take Death's Caress here for sure, because you have to take one of these two, Perseverance of the Ebon Blade. So when you proc your Death and Decay things, you get some versatility. Though this is a 2-point node, versus Russian Blood, which is when that thing is active. Your next Death and Decay heals you per bone shield charge and immediately gains renewed power. We're going to go with this because it's a single point investment instead of 2, which frees you up some points later on. So again, we're now going to go down. We're going to get Rapid Decomp. We're going to get Coag. We're down at the bottom. We still have 5 points. Moving at this side, so some of the traits that we're pretty happy to have are like Rune Tap is pretty nice. Heartbreaker isn't the worst in AoE, though in single target it's not great. It's also a 2-point investment. Again, we skip this one here as a 2-point investment. You're a little strapped for points here, so 2-point investments are a little rough. So that means that the only single point investment you can have is Foul Bulwark, which isn't the greatest. It's not the worst, but it's not the greatest, but it is 1 point over 2 points investment to get down to that trait you really want, which is your Bone Shield giving you haste. So I'm actually going to recommend taking Foul Bulwark and taking Improved Bone Shield. Now to move down, we really do want to move down because Tombstone is very, very good. You get that CDR from consuming Bone Shield charges with Tombstone. I assume at some point it will work with your 2 and 4 piece. It should, in my opinion. And also there's a trait after it that gives you some damage from using Tombstone as well. So you really, really do want to do Tombstone. And you have kind of 3 points to get there. So you have a couple options, right? This trait sucks, okay? It's not good. You don't want to take it. However, that lets you get there as fast as possible. You could get there in 3 points by going Rune Tap, Leeching Strike, Blood Tap, and that gives you access to both Rune Tap and Blood Tap, which are really, really nice to have. So you could do this, and that opens up your bottom trait. However, this does mean that you are missing out on things like Voracious, another buff that's 8 seconds long attached to Death Strike that you're going to keep up. You're missing out on Hemostasis, which is that Blood Boil increasing Death Strike damage, which is not insignificant, especially in AoE, but also even in single target. It's a pretty decent damage increase as well. Even like Bloodworms, they're nice to have. They're a smaller damage increase, but again, there's a bunch of nice to haves all in this tree from here. Leeching Strikes is not the greatest. It's not really needed at all. You won't really notice it also as well. So you're really going down this line to get access to both a Rune Tap and Blood Tap. But like you can get rid of these. You can get Reinforced Bones as a single point investment to get access to this. And then that frees you up to buy these other trades here, like Hemostasis, like Voracious, right? And all of a sudden now you've gone down here. And yeah, you had to take Reinforced Bones, which is certainly worse than every single other trait that we just picked, including all 3 of these and Voracious and Hemostasis. But now you also have Voracious and Hemostasis instead of like Leeching Strike and Blood Tap. So it's kind of a trade-off. Again, you have the options available to you. You can take any number of those. So it's really up to you, up to the content that you're doing, what you kind of really need. So moving down here, Tombstone for sure, taking that. And you have Shattering Bone, which is that damage that I was talking about related to Tombstone. So when Bone Shield is consumed, you deal X amount of shadow damage to nearby enemies, and this damage is tripled when you're within your Death and Decay. So there is your second reason so far to stand in your Death and Decay at all times. As you're getting hit, your Bone Shields are being consumed. This is dealing triple damage while you stand within your Death and Decay. So very, very, very powerful. Moving down the right side here, you've got Sanguine Ground. Another reason to stand in Death and Decay. Just 5% more damage and healing while standing in Death and Decay. Freebie. Let's do that. Red Thirst, pretty easily accessible here. This is just CDR on Vamp Blood for 10 runic power spent. Very, very good. Iron Heart here, which is basically just 20% more absorb on your blood shield, which again does kind of stack with Gloom Ward over here. So it makes these actually relatively large. And that's kind of like the general stuff you take. And now you kind of like, okay, what content am I doing? As you can see here, Gorfiends is here. Very unfortunate placement of Gorfiends. I don't know any content you would take this in if you aren't completely forced to have Gorfiends specifically for a fight, right? Because you already have things like 2 charges of Death Grip. You have a Bomb Slam. So you have these tools over here to group mobs. You don't really necessarily need Gorfiends, and because it competes in the capstone, and DKs have a lot of good traits down here in the capstone, you're not necessarily ever going to take this spell if you don't absolutely have to. So a little unfortunate. You're really never going to see Gorfiends, but it is what it is. Now, if you're talking about like Mythic Plus, especially high Mythic Plus, you're probably going to want to get access to Purgatory. So you'll put a point in this Heart Rend here. So Heart Strike has a chance to increase the damage of your next Death Strike. Nice. Get access to that Purgatory, and you have 1 point to play with again. If you're doing Purgatory and high keys, there's a pretty good chance you're going to want Umbilicus Eternus over here. So this is when Vamp Blood expires. You absorb damage equal to 5 times the damage that your Blood Plague dealt during that time. And again, you have a decent amount of Blood Plague modifiers, as I previously mentioned here. So that can be a pretty large shield, and again, some Absorb shield, so it scales with Gloom Ward as well. And it's something you can kind of use as a staggered fashion with the Dancing Rune Weapon into Vamp Blood, get this big shield, all that stuff, make you super tanky. So it's really, really nice. Especially in content where you're able to kind of multi-target spread that Blood Plague. In lower target scenarios, it's really less valuable. So like Raid, for example, you may want to move this over to Bloodshot, where while this Blood Shield that is now pretty fat is active, you get 25% increased physical damage. Of course, again, Death Strike is physical damage, Heart Strike, physical damage, right? All those things are physical. This has pretty solid uptime, even when you're tanking 100% of the time, by the way. And this will give you like a lot more like single target boss damage as well, especially in Mythic Plus or raids as well. Probably going to be taking this all the time in raids. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. 25% extra damage on like most of your abilities is nothing to scoff at either, right? You do have things like Bone Storm here, which I don't think you're ever gonna want to take Bone Storm. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would rather take some of these other things than kind of double down on like Bone Storm, because I'd much rather also be spending that runic power on consistently getting Death Strikes, right, to keep up Icy Talons, to keep up Coag, to keep up Voracious, those kind of things. And so, yeah, I'm not a big fan of Bone Storm here. And you also have all this RP reduction on Death Strike as well, right? There's 5 there, 5 there. So overall, I'm a big fan of not taking Bone Storm, but it is there if you want it for whatever reason. You're like, hey, nope, no danger at all. Let's take that. Let's go damn here, you know? Something you can do. You're a little locked again. The frustrating part is kind of like this area to me, but I guess it's not a bad spot to be in for DKs, that you have so many good options that on other parts of the tree you're kind of forced to take worse options in one part of the tree just because they are cheaper investments talent wise, right? Specifically taking Foul Bulwark because it's a 1 point over Heartbreaker, which is a 2 point. Reinforced Bone because it's a 1 point and lets you take 2 pretty solid talents on this end, right? These are talents that you'd be happy to not take if they weren't kind of gating you from pathing down this side of the tree. But unfortunately, they are. But it's a relatively small price to pay. I think Blood DK is, like I mentioned, in a pretty solid spot overall right now. They're so tanky, and they have the cheat death as well. Like, they are played well. Like, they are the tankiest tank easily. No question. They're so tanky. They have options here to go deeper into tankiness, get some more damage. They have a couple points of freedom in their class tree and their spec specific tree to kind of put in certain places depending on the situation, which is really nice. And overall, they just play a lot more fun, in my opinion. Again, that's very subjective. Let me know what you guys think, though. Are you planning to main Blood DK in Dragonflight? Maybe one of the other tanks? Leave a comment down below letting me know. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Again, I'll be doing this for all of the tanks in the next few days, so keep an eye out for those videos. If you have any questions, again, comment down below or come stop by my Twitch channel at Tactics, and I'll do my best to answer. I also stream, of course, Beta, Mythic Plus, Mythic Rating, and High Keys as well. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.